All right. Yes, we are back. Weekend streams return now that European leagues have all returned. How are you guys doing? What's up with you? Not the best of weekends, not the worst of weekends. Couple of good performances. Weston McKennie, especially this week, was really good. Pulisic had a very good weekend as well. We're not doing a top 10 today. There just wasn't enough strong performances to really cobble together a top 10. But there's still plenty to talk about. Quick bit of housekeeping. For the next 4 weeks, I think, 3 to 4 weekends, instead of the weekend stream being Sunday afternoon, guys, it's going to be Monday morning. Why, Pete? Because I'm in a play now that runs Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And Thursday and Friday, it's in the evening, and we have matinees Saturday, Sunday, so 12 to 3. So no possibility of a Sunday afternoon stream unless it's very, very late. So we'll do it Monday morning, probably around 10 Pacific time. So just heads up, don't be expecting a Sunday stream. It'll be Monday morning. Once that ends, we will probably return to regularly scheduled programming. Albert says, Pete, do you know if any MLS players are moving to Europe? Albert, I am so glad you asked that question because that is one of our topics of discussion for today. And it's an interesting one because there's some trends that we need to be looking at and getting out ahead of, right? So yeah, we're definitely going to talk about that. Tom, BMR says, hey, Tom. Tom says, BMR, hello. Little bromance happening in the chat here. Shaq Morton, Napoli. When is the MLS window over? Oh, the MLS window doesn't close until like April. They've got like 4 months of shopping. The problem is, for Europe, January 31st, that window closes. Fumar Mota says, break a leg. I'm here sitting on the highway in southwest Michigan. Emergency ahead of me. Kevin Polite is driving as per the usual. Welcome back to 11 Yanks, says the turd in the background. Greg Berhalter is the only USMNT manager with a win percentage above 80% when playing against island countries. Greg Berhalter forever. Important stat that we often ignore. His win percentage against island nations. Give Alvaro Barrial American citizenship. We could use a backup left back that scores Puskas. Not sure I agree with you on finding more mid-MLSers. My favorite one so far. Any Griffin Dorsey transfer rumors? I heard there was EPL interest. Chris Johnson. Pep Guardiola wants him to start over Kyle Walker. That is how good Griffin Dorsey is. And they're offering upwards of $75 million to the Houston Dynamo for the services of the great, the one and only, the indomitable Griffin Dorsey. Happy that the USMNT is playing in San Antonio, which is where I live, but I will not watch Greg Berhalter. I'd rather buy a USMNT jersey than watch Greg. If it helps, I will be doing a show during that friendly, so I won't be watching it either. And it's not really a USMNT game. It's an MLS promotional tour. And that's a very big different thing. RD Revolver says, Japan, the only island country we fear, as we should. As we should. Winelkai Gonzalez. Pete, how's it going? When I heard Venezuela is about to face El Tri in Copa America, I cannot wait to humiliate El Tri fans. So in that way, they can stop talking crap about the USMNT in Venezuela. Winelkai, we could beat Mexico in every single game for 30 years. They could not qualify for multiple World Cups. They could never win a game again in their history against anybody. And yet, El Tri fans would still be online claiming that they are the greatest thing since sliced bread and U.S. men's national team is shit. Facts do not matter to these folk. Some of them, obviously. All right. Let's go ahead and dive into this. We have a lot of different things to talk about today, but let's begin with Gio Reyna to Real Sociedad. So this is a rumor that has been, propagated by, lots of different outlets, but, Transfer Market is making it an official rumor. So Real Sociedad also have a history of dealing with failed Borussia Dortmund projects. Okay, so this is just a clip that I'm reading. The club has previously signed Mikel Merino for $7 million in 2018 and Alexander Isak, a lot of you should know him from Newcastle, for $15 million in 2019. Merino was originally sold by Dortmund to Newcastle before joining Real Sociedad and has since developed into a key player for the San Sebastian-based club, increasing his market value to $50 million. Geez, I got to get closer to this thing. Let me just, so I can read this. Thank you. In the meantime, Isak, took La Liga by storm, scoring 44 goals in 132 games across all competitions, and was then sold with a massive profit for $70 million to Newcastle in 2022. So they're talking about why Gio Reyna to Sociedad might be a good idea. Okay, because they have this history of taking guys who maybe, were out of favor at Dortmund and continuing to develop them and turning them into very, very good players. Okay, profit. So they sold him for $70 million to Newcastle in 2022, right? They bought him for $15 million in 2019. 3 years later, $70 million. That's a €55 million profit. To Newcastle in 2022, where he has continued his positive development, becoming a star striker in the Premier League. Merino's and Isak's development have not been lost on Borussia Dortmund's management, who still believe that Reyna could be a valuable asset. Okay, so this is written by our Canadian friend. I don't remember his name. Anyways, he's the one who wrote this. There's a little bit of shade thrown towards Gio Reyna because he's Canadian. But let's talk real quickly about Gio Reyna to Real Sociedad. I would be in favor. Yeah, Manuel Veth. Thank you, BMR. It's Manuel Veth who wrote this. So I would be in favor of Gio Reyna to Real Sociedad for one reason. If it is a loan, okay? I don't think Terzic is going to last very long at Dortmund, okay? And Terzic... Did anybody watch the Dortmund Darmstadt game on the weekend? Okay, so this is after the vote of confidence. Terzic is terrible. I know he's 17 points off the top in the Bundesliga. But vote of confidence for Terzic. They come back right in the second half of the season, and the 20th place team, the last team in the Bundesliga, dominated them in that first half. Okay? Dominated them. So Terzic still has not learned. Dortmund scored some goals in transition. But if you're getting dominated by the last place team in the Bundesliga, what that tells me is nothing has changed. Okay? So Terzic may not last as the head coach. Now, they love him at Dortmund because, he's a club guy. He's proper Dortmund, but it would be German. Proper Dortmund. And he might become the new sporting director if Sebastian Kehl leaves, right? So I don't know. I feel like Gio Reyna to Sociedad would be good, and there would also be some question marks about it, okay? Let's start with the pros. The pros are Coach Imanol Alguacil has used multiple flexible formations this season over at Real Sociedad. 4-4-2, 4-1-4-1, and 4-4-3-3. So that would be a sign of a willingness to incorporate Gio in some formation, right? Whether it's as an attacking midfielder in a 4-3-3 or a 4-1-4-1 or as a second forward in a 4-4-2. He's even played 4-2-3-1 once or twice, but not very often. The other thing is Sociedad are still in hunt for the La Liga top 4 and the second round of the Champions League, right? So they're still in the Champions League and they're still pushing for top 4 spots. So there are lots of games and a lot of pressure for Sociedad in the second half of this season. They've only scored 8 goals in the last 10 games. Okay, so it's not like Sociedad are firing on all cylinders in terms of goal scoring. 8 goals in the last 10 games is very, very poor. So they could absolutely use attacking reinforcements. The other thing that I actually didn't put up here is that Real Sociedad never really replaced David Silva. Okay, they don't really have a pure 10. Bryce Mendes, you could argue, is a little bit of a pure 10. Okay, so they do have one. But there is some evidence that Gio Reyna could go in there and at least start some. He probably wouldn't start right away. I think he'd start on the bench, but would get more opportunities to show what he can do than he's getting at Dortmund, where Terzic clearly does not rate him. I also think, as a very technical player, Gio Reyna would enjoy La Liga, which is a very technical league. Let's talk about the cons. These are not cons. These are more like question marks, right? It is not clear if Alguacil sees him as a 10 or as a winger, right? We don't really know. How does Alguacil want to use him? Does he want to use him as a winger? He hasn't really played much with a 10. Actually, no. Bryce Mendes has played not as a 10, but as a very attacking 8, which Gio can also play. The other question mark is Bryce Mendes is having a very good season for Real Sociedad, but there may be a question of how many minutes can he get. Would he have to beat out Bryce Mendes, right? And there's no certainty how he would adapt to La Liga, right? I think he would. I think he would do well in La Liga, but we don't know that for sure. So those, I guess, they're less cons and they're more question marks. Now, Girona has been bandied about as a potential spot. It doesn't seem like that's an immediate option. That's a Manchester City club. That might be interesting because of the Man City connection. But I'll say this. Gio doesn't need to leave Dortmund right away. Like, it doesn't need to be a permanent move. I think 6 months in Spain, see two things. A, how he does, and B, what happens to Terzic. I am going to say right now, I think there's a very high chance Terzic will not be in charge of Dortmund come the end of the season. At least not as the head coach, possibly in the front office where they love him, sporting director. They're going to give him some kind of title because they love that man so much for reasons nobody understands. Even the Dortmund fans are like, why? Right? So if Terzic leaves, maybe the next coach wants Gio and rates him. And Royce, sign another year. We'll see what happens there. But it doesn't seem like there's room for Dortmund, especially now that they signed Sancho. They have so many other attacking options, and they do not rate Gio. Whether you agree with them that those other guys are clearly better, personally, I don't. Or whether or not, the point is, Gio, they don't seem to want him there for one reason or another. Certainly not as a 10. Now, it is interesting to note for everybody who says that he's a spoiled brat and he needs to work harder. According to all the blogs, and these are not American blogs, these are German blogs, Reyna's doing very, very well in training. That he is showing really well in training. Terzic just doesn't want to use him. So at that point, if you're showing well in training, if you're playing well when you come on the field, which he is, despite the limited minutes, then what are you doing? What are you doing, right? Like, you can't do any more than that. The coach just doesn't rate you. So we'll see what happens with Gio. We'll monitor this potential transfer and see where it goes. But I think there's a lot of pros and certainly a lot of upside to a 6-month loan. Now, if there's a clause to buy, that's up to Real Sociedad. That might spell the end of his time at Dortmund. I'd say just go for a 6-month loan and then in the summer make a decision. Is Terzic still there? Were you happy in Sociedad? Because he'll have 1 year left on his contract. So if he doesn't renew, then Dortmund will probably have to sell him or risk losing him for free or almost nothing. All right, let's move on. I want to talk a little bit about the transfer window, because here we are in the transfer window of January 2024. Now, this has traditionally, January has been a bigger transfer window for USMNT players in MLS going abroad than the summer has for various reasons. Number one, European teams generally conduct their big transfers in the summer, and in January, they do smaller transfers. They don't do the big ones. It's usually, we had a certain amount of injuries. We need replacements for these players for the rest of the season. Sometimes it's plugging holes in depth, like we need a backup left back. Or sometimes it is also just prospects. This guy's a potential prospect. We sign him in January. He's with us for 6 months. And then after that, let's go, maybe next season he'll be with us. So that's one of the reasons why that's where most of the U.S. moves have happened, from MLS at least, okay? Another reason is obviously it's the end of and beginning of the MLS season, right? MLS teams, are starting their season, so they're more likely to sell a player in January than they are when they're in the middle of a season and chasing playoffs in the summer. So you can look here, in the last 3 years, there's been a huge amount of USMNT transfers abroad. Let me just pull down this thing so you guys can see the whole slide here. Okay. So in January of 2021, we had Brian Reynolds, Mark McKenzie, Brendan Aronson, Justin Che, and Joe Scally. They all went abroad, January 2021. That same summer, so that was 5 transfers. That same summer, there were 4. Still a lot, but less. Reggie Cannon left to Boa Vista. Sam Vines went to Antwerp. Tanner Tessman went to Venezia. And Gianluca Busio also went to Venezia. Okay? So then in January 2022 was the biggest transfer window ever in terms of sheer numbers. Okay? James Sands went to NYCFC, went from NYCFC to Rangers. George Bello went to Arminia Bielefeld from Atlanta. Gabriel Slonina went to Chelsea from Chicago. Kevin Paredes went from DC to Wolfsburg. DK went from Orlando to West Brom. Mueller went from Orlando to Hibernian. Pepe went from Dallas to Augsburg. Trusty went from Colorado to Arsenal. Mauricio Cuevas went from the Galaxy to Brugge. And Jonathan Gomez went from Louisville to Real Sociedad on a free transfer. Then that summer of 2022, there were only 2 transfers of Americans from MLS to Europe. One was Matt Turner, and the other one was Griffin Yao. Okay. Then in January 2023, and I think this is kind of what I'm trying to say here, we see a definite slowdown of guys moving to Europe. Not just in January, but in the summer as well. Georgi Mihailovic went from Montreal to AZ, okay, for $3 million. Paxton Aronson went from Philly to Frankfurt for $4 million. And the little-known Benji Michel went from Orlando to Aruca on a free transfer. Okay, so that was a huge slowdown in January of 2023. And then in the summer, there were no moves from MLS, from Americans, from going to Europe from MLS, except for Christian Fletcher, who was loaned from DC United to Swansea, who are basically, they have the same owner of those 2 clubs, Jason Levine. So, and that was a loan, not even really a transfer. What's happening? Okay. I think this is me speculating, and I also spoke with a source about this. After Alphonso Davies did quite well, going from MLS to Bayern, and after Christian Pulisic and Weston McKennie, and to a degree Tyler Adams burst onto the scene, there was a rush, right? European teams were like, oh, we can find value in MLS for relatively cheap who could turn out to be quite good. And so they took a lot of chances on players, right? Now, a lot of those players have not worked out. Let's just take a look at this list of guys to begin with. How many of these guys, there's 3 categories of these guys. 1, successful transfer, right? Like they got more than the value that they paid for them. 2, TBD, means they're maybe still young and are still developing, so it remains to be seen how well they'll do in the long term. And 3, flops. Okay? Let's start with Brian Reynolds. He went from Dallas to Roma for $7 million. They had to sell him at a loss to Westerlo. Okay? So that's a flop. He has not flopped yet because he's still young enough, and we'll see how he does. But from Roma's perspective, they didn't even recoup the $7 million that they paid for him, so that's a failure. Mark McKenzie, Philly to Genk. That was a good move. 5.45 mil. He's been a solid starter and solid defender for them for a long time. Success. Okay. Brendan Aronson, 12.7 million to go to Salzburg from Philly. And then, so Salzburg recovered that, certainly, right? Because they then sold him to Leeds for 30 million. But when you look overall, Brendan Aronson has been kind of a flop in Europe, and Leeds definitely overpaid. Think about this. Brendan Aronson was sold for 30 million. Pulisic went to Milan for 20 million. Think about how ridiculously Leeds overpaid. So Salzburg will call that a success, but anybody looking at Brendan Aronson's trajectory in Europe is it's going down, and now he can't even be good in Germany. Justin Che is now in the 2nd division of the Netherlands. Joe Scally, success, 1.8 million, and good, solid starter for Gladbach, success. Reggie Cannon, 2.5 mil. He left on a free transfer at Boa Vista. Now he's in the championship. Not bad, not terrible. Sam Vines coming back to Colorado. I don't want to say failure, but he clearly didn't make it in Antwerp. Tanner Tessman and Gianluca Busio are got relegated with Venezia, but it's TBD. If they can get them back up there, then it will be something of a success, you might say, but I'd say it's still TBD. James Sands couldn't hack it at Rangers, back in MLS, right? Pings reminded me, Caden Clark. Caden Clark was signed a little bit earlier, though. He was already a Leipzig prospect, but yes, that's a fair point. George Bello, Atlanta to Bielefeld, got relegated, not even there anymore, is now at LASK. Gabriel Slonina, TBD, 10 million. Let's see how he continues to develop. He's over in Belgium right now. Kevin Paredes, 6.7 million, TBD, right? Hasn't made the strides of progress that we, would want him to make necessarily this year or this season, so TBD. Daryl DK, lot of injuries. 8.6 million. They have not really recouped that yet, West Brom. So let's see. Chris Mueller was back. Couldn't even hack it at Hibernian. Back in Chicago. Ricardo Pepi. I'll be honest. We consider Ricardo Pepi TBD, right? Because he's still young, and when he's on the field, he's playing well. Certainly PSV did a nice little piece of business there, it seems like. But for Augsburg, they paid 20 million for him. And they sold him for 10? So they had to sell him at a loss to PSV. Augsburg will consider that a failure. Austin Trusty, major success. Arsenal brought him over for 1.8 million, same owner, so some interesting bookkeeping there. But then they managed to sell him for 4 million to Sheffield United, and he's now starting in the Premier League. So good success. Mauricio Cuevas, major flop, now back at LA Galaxy. Jonathan Gomez, TBD, hasn't made a single appearance yet for Real Sociedad, and it's been 2 years. Summer 2022, Matt Turner, I would say a bit of a flop. Okay, couldn't get the job at Arsenal, fine. Go to Nottingham Forest. How's he doing at Nottingham Forest? Not great. Griffin Yao, 91K, DC to Westerlo, fine. Georgi Mihailovic, back in MLS after a year. Paxton Aronson hasn't really been able to break through with Frankfurt. Benji Michel, bench player for Aruca. Christian Fletcher, TBD. So my point is, if you look at a lot of these transfers, 75% of these transfers have either been flops or remained to be seen that they can really be a contributor and justify their transfer fee. There are only a handful of successes. Of this list, you could argue the true successes are probably Joe Scally, Mark McKenzie, and Austin Trusty. Other than that, there's nobody you can point to and say definite success. So I think European clubs are starting to chill a little bit, particularly on Americans who were developed in MLS, spent some time in MLS, and then moved. I think they look at, if you're 16, okay, or 17, and you go over there the way that Gio did, or Weston did, or Pulisic did, and they think there's a high ceiling talent there, then I think they'll go for that. But I don't think that, European clubs now are going to be paying $5+ million for American prospects that have spent a year or 2 or 3 in MLS unless they see a really high ceiling. Okay. And I think if you look at a lot of the guys that are being touted to move, it's not necessarily a guarantee that I don't think there are a lot of top end prospects in MLS right now. There are some maybes. Okay. There's Diego Luna, potentially. I don't think he's going to go anywhere this January. Let's see how he does in the summer. Brian Gutierrez, potential is there. Chris Brady also has some potential. Then you have guys like Noel Buck, Benji Kremaski, Obed Vargas. Cade Cowell was supposed to be a big prospect. He went to where? Liga MX. We'll see how he does over there. So Kevin Sullivan, we'll see. A lot of people hyping up Kevin Sullivan. The kid is 14. I refuse to hype up a 14-year-old because he has a few clips online. Jack McGlynn, it's been 2 years now, Jack McGlynn there. There doesn't seem to be that much European interest in Jack McGlynn. And that might have something to do with something that Tack and I have pointed out with Jack McGlynn, very good left foot, amazing passing range when he's got time and space to do so. When the game gets very frantic, when he's got limited time and space, sometimes he struggles. Doesn't mean he can't go abroad, just means maybe he's not as good as some people are hyping him up to be, right? Griffin Dorsey is the American Danny Alves. Petkovic killing it for Chelsea. Yeah. So, guys, I'm talking about Americans that were developed in MLS. Okay. So, a lot of these guys were not developed in MLS. They might have spent some time, like Tati Castellanos spent some time in MLS, but they were not developed by MLS. And there's a very big difference. They didn't come through the American development system. So, it'll be interesting to see if these MLS prospects, John Token, Caleb Wiley, all these guys that people are, Owen Wolf, they're going to be this. Cade Cowell, Champions League potential. I think European teams are going, unless you're really, really standing out in MLS, like you're a top 5. If you're young, like 20, and you're a top 5, in your position in MLS, maybe. But if you're not, I think the interest is starting to cool. And I think we're seeing that from 2022 to 2023. And so far in the December window of January window of 2024, what are we looking at? We're looking at one guy, Donovan Pines, going to the 3rd division in England, Barnsley. By the way, good for Donovan Pines for doing that, right? He's challenging himself. He's trying to get better as a player. He's betting on himself. I have no problem with that. And this is not a criticism of Donovan Pine. But if that is your only transfer in a window that has traditionally been a big window for American transfers abroad, then maybe it's time to look within and go, are we doing as good a job with MLS prospects, American MLS prospects, as we think we are? Because there have been a few hits, certainly, but for a lot of the guys who've spent any time in MLS, there's been a lot of flops. And in fact, it's now going the other way around, right? It's now going Zach Steffen, Sam Vines, and Georgi Mihailovic, 3 guys who came back, right? Before that, you had James Sands come back. Chris Mueller came back. Who else came back? Richie Ledesma came back. We'll see what happens with him. Nico Giacchini came back, right? So I think the trend is actually going to go the other way. And I think we could come to a situation where, unless you are an elite prospect that can play for a top 5 league, or maybe the Netherlands, okay, MLS like Belgium and Scotland and Salzburg might not be paying money for you anymore. You might have to stay in MLS. And in some ways, hear me out, that's a good thing for MLS. It's not good for the national team, but it's a good thing for MLS. For example, Sam Vines, Georgi Mihailovic, and Zach Steffen will undoubtedly make the Colorado Rapids better. Tack, you want to hop on and talk a little bit about Brazilian development while we're on this? Let me know, because Brazilians sell, and they sell high. Every summer, the Brazilians sell 20, 30, 40 million prospects at 16, 17 years old to Europe. MLS is not doing that, right? So, Tack, let me know if you want to hop on, and you can talk a little bit about that too. Sounds like MLS doesn't foster a good environment for development. It's a fair question to ask. I think MLS has gotten better at development, certainly, but I think it's still a far way off from where it needs to be in terms of, do we want to be a league that can develop world-class players for the U.S. men's national team? Tack says, send me the link. All right. I'll send Tack the link. I'll send it to you on Twitter, Tack. And Tack can maybe hop on and talk a little bit about this topic, because I know he's also very passionate about this, and he has the perspective of the Brazilians. I sent it to you, Tack. Pete, if only the MLS can copy the Brazilian, Uruguayan, and Argentine youth development talent. Yeah, we'll see. I think there's a lot of reasons why we don't. Pay to play is a big one. The lack of street soccer culture, the lack of, free play, futsal, a lot of these different things are not there, and that's the big difference between us and the South American countries. Pay to play is absolutely hurting us. And, I had Tab Ramos on recently, and he pushed back very heavily, and he thinks pay to play is fine, and he thinks we're doing a great job of development. And I disagree. Tab is also trying to get a job, right, with MLS right now. So he has to be careful what he says. I'm not saying he doesn't really think that. I'm just saying that oftentimes when you talk to a guy, and we experience this with a guy like Jermaine Jones, who says, all these great things about that. And then when he's all of a sudden in with US Soccer and wants a job, he's like, oh, yeah, everything's good. It's good. It's good. It's good. And then we find out 2 weeks later, oh, yeah, now he's the under-19 assistant coach, right? And now he wants to try and get a job. So a lot of these figures are great, and they say what they think until they want a job. And then all of a sudden, the tune starts to change a little bit. So, yeah. Is MLS doing a good job? I'm not saying they're not doing a good job. I think that a lot of the MLS prospects, and by the way, for anybody, and I hear this a lot, okay? I hear, the Eredivisie is actually very close to MLS. They're very, very close. And it's like, okay, they're not very, very close. Hey, Zach, what's up?
Hey, just setting up. Hold on.
Yeah, no worries. So Georgi Mihailovic, for example, who for 2 years before he went to the Netherlands was a standout player in MLS, one of the better midfielders, I'd say top 10 midfielder in MLS, couldn't even get off the bench over at AZ, okay, in the Eredivisie. So let's keep that in mind. So, Tack, we're talking about the if you look at the trend of American transfers from MLS to Europe, in 2021 and 2022, it was like this gold rush. And in 2023, it slowed down significantly. And in 2024, so far, there's no transfers except one guy going to the third division in the UK, compared to, you want to talk about Brazil, or just give your thoughts on this topic in general.
Well, I think MLS, we had a few guys that came out of MLS before these ones that you went all the way to January of 2021. Before that, we had some transfers like Miguel Almiron, Alphonso Davies. Right. I think what happened there was a lot of European teams were like, there's some value here, and it's cheap compared to Brazil, for example, in Argentina. If you want to get a top prospect in Argentina, you're paying 20 million at least, right? Sometimes more, something around that. Brazil, you might even have to hit like 60 million for an 18-year-old. But then they looked at the U.S. like, wait a second, Alphonso Davies, Miguel Almiron, that I know he's not an MLS Academy player, but he was playing MLS and developing there. And then obviously the rise of a few American players like Weston McKennie. He came from MLS. Tyler Adams.
He was developed in MLS.
MLS, Tyler Adams. Pulisic wasn't MLS, but United States of America. So Gio Reyna, Joe Scally. So players were things. Well, Joe Scally was after, but you get my point. There were players that were actually showing that there was value here. So obviously a lot of teams try to jump into that, one for soccer reasons, to have a performance in the field, a little bit of marketing too, to get into that American market, get some attention here. But then you go by your list, and I don't know if you went, I joined in when you were talking more or less at pretty much at the end, January of 2023 in summer. I don't know if you went through all of them, but there were far too many flops throughout the list, which makes these clubs in Europe obviously be a bit more cautious of how they go about things. We are not a proven market. And then you mentioned Brazil, and I tweeted this for Mexico fans because they seem to not get it. They were like complaining that if Santi Jimenez was Brazilian, they would pay $100 million for him. Like, sure, it doesn't mean a player's better because he's Brazilian. The only point is the Brazilian market has had many world-class players, so the risk of betting on him for $100 million and being world-class is high. While Mexico, they might have had like 2 world-class players in their entire soccer lifetime that I can remember.
I mean, Rafa Marquez, and I don't know.
Sanchez.
Oh, yeah, Hugo Sanchez.
So
not
like,
Chicharito. Chicharito was never world-class.
So 2 or 3. And then you look at Brazil, they have like 4 or 5 every generation. So it's worth betting. That's literally it. These are businesses, and they're going to put money on what they think. There's a lot of hype on the American market that I think it cooled off, because you look at some of the names. Can I go through them with you real quick?
Yeah, I mean, went through them already, but go for it.
So first one, Brian Reynolds. I wouldn't say he flopped in Europe, but he didn't work out in Roma, and he still struggled
at a loss.
Exactly. Mark McKenzie, okay for Genk. I think probably a decent investment. He's working out, starting. Brendan Aronson, they did a good job on flipping him, Salzburg, but Leeds, they most certainly regret it, for sure. Justin Che didn't work out. Joe Scally, that's a good one. That was a good.
That's probably the best value for money in this list. 1.8 million for a Bundesliga starter.
That was a bargain.
That's a bargain. Yeah.
Reggie Cannon didn't work out too much. Kind of stagnated in Portugal. Then they didn't pay his wages. He left. Kind of stagnated. Sam Vines, he's back, right? He came back?
Yeah, looks like he's back in Colorado.
So Sam Vines came back. Tenor Testament might still pan out. He's persisting there. That might be a decent one. Gianluca Busio could still pan out, but the number's twice almost as much as Tenor Testament.
And Testament has been better in Serie B.
More consistent for sure. Much more consistent. And then let's go. James Sands definitely flopped for Rangers. George Bello definitely flopped. Slonina still has some potential there. Just very expensive, but I'm not ready to say Slonina is a make it or break it yet. Kevin Paredes, pricey, might pay off, but hasn't really.
This year, it feels like he's stagnated a little bit this season.
Yeah, I'm starting to also see a lot of little injuries, which is a little bit of a problem. Consistent. He's injured again, by the way.
Didn't play this weekend. Yeah, that's a problem.
Daryl DK, 8.6 million. I think DK is who he is. He's a big physical player that can be effective in the championship, but I think that's his level. I think that's what he's going to be.
He can't stay healthy. I mean, how many times has this guy been injured in the last 2 years?
A lot, and he had an Achilles injury, so problem. Chris Miller flopped. Ricardo Pepi, I think he did flop.
Sold him at a loss, so they consider that a flop for them.
I would consider it too. I know he's still young and he's bouncing back for PSV, and I think he'll be just fine. I think it'll just be probably he's most likely going to be above the Augsburg level at some point if he's not already. But again, the way the transfer happened, they paid 16 million. That's a lot for Augsburg.
Yeah,
Trusty to Arsenal. They sold him for more than what they paid. So
they sold him. That's a success.
Yeah. Cuevas didn't work out. Jonathan Gomez, I haven't heard of him in a long time. Still there in the second.
He's still in the second division. He's on loan to Mirades, I believe. And he's starting in the second division, but it's been 2 years at Sociedad now. He left.
Reminds me of Shaq Moore.
Could be. We'll see. But yeah, so far it's TBD, but I would say not a success right now.
Matt Turner, I don't think it's been a success. I know Arsenal sold him for more to Nottingham Forest for some reason.
8.6.
But it's not been good for him at Nottingham Forest so far. It's not been great. Griffin, I don't even know who that is. So
he's a winger for Westerlo. He's not very good. He gets a goal for Westerlo every now and then. For 91K, Westerlo got a nice little player for the Belgian league.
Yeah. So there you go. Mihailovic, that didn't work out at all. Paxton Aronson, still early, but I'm not seeing much progress. It's been a year, and I'm not seeing the progress there. The minutes are not going up. When he plays in the Bundesliga, struggling. They even signed Donny van de Beek right now, Eintracht. So I don't know. Can't call it a flop yet. Too young, and he's still there, but it's not going well. Benji Michel, I don't even know how he went to Europe. I watched him in Orlando quite a bit. I still don't know how that I don't even know how he's doing. He
never plays for Aruca anymore. He sits on their bench or he's not in the squad.
Doesn't surprise me. He was a backup for Orlando.
Yeah.
You know that. Right? He's like literally a backup for Orlando.
Remember he was in the Olympic team, the Jason Christ Olympic qualifier. Remember that?
And then Christian Fletcher, I wouldn't even count that as a transfer because DC and Swansea have the same ownership. It was like the Paul Riola move. And it was a loan, and he only played in their academy as far as I am concerned. That's what I remember, at least.
Yeah.
I guess this is only USMNT January moves. You're only counting MLS, because Johnny.
I'm talking about MLS prospects, American prospects going in January. Obviously, guys in Europe are moving within Europe. That's a completely different thing. But because it's January now and there's no MLS moves happening, and there probably won't be.
No, I mean, if you look at the list of players that could and should challenge themselves in Europe, we were expecting Miles to take a shot. Didn't do it. He went for the money.
He didn't take a shot because nobody offered him enough money.
Because
they don't value him.
I think from a personal standpoint, he made the right decision.
I think he did.
Yeah.
I think he did. But from a USMNT standpoint, I don't think he did. I think it was a mistake. I think he had an opportunity to challenge himself. And it was $500,000 a year. Okay, how many people in this chat are making $500,000 a year? Probably none of us. So it's not like he's has to go there for poverty wages. 500, but he decided that maybe he knew that Greg is in love with him the way he was in love with Aaron Long, and it doesn't matter what he does. He'll still go to a World Cup and a Copa America. He might even start at Copa America. Who knows?
Mhm.
Like, from Miles Robinson's perspective, I can make 1.8 million and I can also stay with the USMNT. But that says more about Greg Berhalter than
And I
him.
mean, stay in your home country, right? We traveled around quite a bit. Me and you we lived in different countries, and there's always the country you prefer. And it's usually your home.
Yeah,
Usually, not saying everyone. I know there's people that are American and they live abroad, but I don't know, man. I would live in another country, but I'm much more comfortable here. And if you gave me the option, I would stay here. If you gave
right.
me same salary, I'm like, I'm staying in America if it's the same salary. But of
Yeah,
course, if you go and you tell me you're gonna go to, I don't know, Japan, which I really want to get to know Japan, by the way, and we're gonna triple your salary, I'm going to Japan.
right.
Uh, so from that perspective, Christian Fletcher too is I don't really consider it a transfer, so there's not really much. And when you talk about Miles Robinson, when we criticize him staying, you kind of already made the point that if he was going to make 500, 600K abroad, that is way far poverty money. It's a lot of money. But yes, he would lose $1 million. And at the end of the day, when we talk about these players, I don't make one single dollar of their salary. So my criticism and Pete's criticism is going to go towards what we think for the U.S. men's national team and their careers.
Right. We're looking at it from a USMNT perspective and the growth of the game. For the growth of the game, I think it's important for every player to try, if they have the opportunity, to go and to experience a league where there's real pressure, where there's a real need to get results on a week in, week out. And to credit to a lot of these guys who did that, like James Sands, Georgi Mihailovic, George Bello, Sam Vines, even the ones who came back after flopping, Zach Steffen, they tried. They went and they pushed themselves and they experienced something. And I believe they're all better players for it. And they'll bring that experience home with them. So it's fine to not make it. For me, I take more issue with not trying at all.
Someone's talking about Fidel Barajas. He said, I
Yeah,
wish it was someone that would have tried to make a move. I talked a little bit to his camp to know why, because he wanted to go to Europe. It's just that the offers he had in Europe, one, financially, were not probably not as good as RSL. Two, from his conversations with the teams in Europe and the ones he talked in MLS, RSL is the one that offered the path for first team minutes, which is what he's seeking right now. He wants to play.
sure.
And honestly, if you're going to go to like a PSV and just stay at the young PSV forever, and maybe if RSL is like, hey, can have you here for a season or two, first team, it was his decision on Fidel. He's 17 also. So
That's
it,
the thing. If he balls out for 2 years in MLS, he can still get a move to Europe at 19, which is still
mhm.
young enough.
It's still very young. Yeah. And again, for a 17-year-old, if you're performing well in MLS, that's big time. We talk about how MLS is not the level of top European leagues and top South American leagues, but it's not easy for a 17-year-old to perform in MLS. If you do so, you're really good. Uh, and a couple players that could go to Europe still this window. I don't think they will, but they probably will go soon. Diego Luna is probably one that should go as soon as he can, as soon as there's actual offers. Um, but
I
I
would
am
say Guti is another one. Brian Gutierrez.
Gutierrez, another one. There's a few names, but I want to add that I'm a bit concerned with the generation coming up when compared to the current one. The players that are over 20 and compare our U20s and U18s, and when you go a few years back, the few players that we have now,
Yeah.
it does look like it looks like our ceiling is going down. That's the problem.
Yes. Our floor is improving slightly, but our ceiling doesn't seem to be. And we are doing a lot of good recruiting, and that's helping our ceiling a lot as well. Let's be honest.
Hmm.
But in terms of actual development, that was kind of the point of this. We're maybe not doing as good a job as we think we are. We're getting better, but I think we're still a very far cry off from where we need to be to have a competitive national team in the long term. Like, I think the guys we have now will be fine until 2030. But after that, there's going to be a big drop off. And I think that's something to be aware of if we don't improve our production pipeline now. Because the last thing we want is to become Liga MX and Mexico, right? All their guys ended up either staying in Mexico or coming back to Mexico because that's where all the money was. And they weren't good enough. Let's be honest. Part of it was they weren't producing good enough players that teams in Europe were willing to pay them really good money. They were producing average to good players and a lot of shit players, let's be honest. So now they're all in Liga MX, and the quality of the Mexican national team has dropped significantly in the last 3 to 4 years. So it's something to be aware of. But before we move on to our next topic, we do have a new sponsor to talk about, Underdog Fantasy
Not so
Pick'em.
new.
Yeah.
Not so new. They're coming
Not
back.
so new. They were with us during the World Cup, and they're back. They will be with us for the foreseeable future, also on Tax Channel. So, guys, Underdog Fantasy, if you don't know, is a fantasy sports game. As you can see here, you can play any sport you want, but obviously I like soccer, and my favorite game is this one. You go to the top left-hand corner, pick 'em. Now, there's two, Tack. Maybe you can help me out. What is the difference between soccer and FIFA?
I'm not gonna lie to you. I haven't figured that out. I've noticed one thing though. Every time I want to play a Liga MX game, it's on soccer.
Right.
And then FIFA seems to be Europe. That's what I think it is.
But sometimes the Premier League is on soccer also.
Yes, and MLS was on FIFA when I played it. So I think they're just confused, and I'm just gonna have to talk to them about it because I just think they have soccer and FIFA, and both are soccer, and they just randomly put it differently, I guess.
Yeah.
But look at this. There's also, I think, NBA and basketball, I think. So
is there NBA and basketball? This might be global basketball. No picks on basketball.
There's NBA combos. But I just play soccer.
NBA here.
NBA. See, I play NBA sometimes.
Right.
But they do the same. It's like, I don't know. I'm going to have to talk to them. But
anyways, between these two, so it's Monday, so obviously there's not a lot of interesting games. But Frosinone versus Atalanta. And what you can do is, what I try to do is look for inefficiencies, right? So sometimes it'll happen. I don't know a lot of these players. So let's say Tune Koopmeyers. If he's getting assists every game, you think there's a chance he'll get an assist, then you put it as higher or lower. I don't know why it says this player.
It's unavailable. You have to pick the higher than just get one assist.
Yeah. So, for example, let's say Charles de Ketelaere. Will he get a goal against Frosinone? Potentially. So I have him there. And then what you can do is you put, let's say, $10, and it gets multiplied. So the more picks you have, let's say Martin Dirun, I say he's going to get a chance of one assist.
So now they have different rules, and you can't put ones that, for example, this guy can assist Charles de Ketelaere. So that would be in one play, both would get you the win. So you can't do that. So you essentially want to pick players that there's no conflict among the stats in the same team. Opposite teams, sometimes it works.
So the goalkeeper for Frosinone, for example, might be under a lot of pressure because Atalanta is the better team. So could he make higher than 3.5 saves? Reasonable that he could make 4 saves. So now I add him. And as you can see, now I get $45. If I add a third one here, then it becomes all of a sudden $112 if I get all 3. So it's just a fun way to add a few little stakes if you're going to watch a game anyways. So thank you to Underdog. Oh, and by the way, they are matching anybody who joins now. If you click the link in the description, they are matching whatever you put up to $100. So if you put $100 in your account to play this game, they will match that. So, or you can use my code 11Yanks. That's 11YANKS, all caps. So thank you, Underdog. Go check it out, guys. It's fun. Thank you for sponsoring the channel. All right, let's move on. Tack, you're welcome to stay or go whenever you want, but we're just have 2 more topics. The first one is this roster, and I think it's an interesting trend. We have 9 Mexican Americans in El Tree's latest roster, okay, from MLS clubs. All these 9, those are the names and the clubs that they're from. Not all from MLS. One of them is not an MLS club. It's just a club, the San Diego Surf. And then the other one is from Sacramento Republic, which is a USL club. Now, what I think is interesting about this is Mexican fans especially have spent a long time crapping on the U.S. development system, and rightfully so. For a long time, the U.S. development system was quite poor, and it's still poor, although it's getting better. But the Mexican development system is so poor that they're actually coming to the American development system and taking our guys who are dual nats and saying, hey, come play for us. And I think that's going to continue for several reasons. I think the U.S. men's national team is very young and very full. And unless you have world class potential, I think it's going to be very, very hard for young players to break into our top 23, certainly our top 18. So if you're a young Mexican American dual nat, in the next 5 years, we might see young guys go, I have greater potential to play for Mexico in the long run just because of their lack of depth and their lack of quality. And that means they're going to be coming for our guys. On top of that, think about it this way. They play the majority of their friendly games now in the US. Who are they appealing to? They're appealing to Mexican American fans that live in the United States, right? Why not put on the field Mexican American players that could appeal to that fan base? Now, I think this is going to continue for the reasons I said. Our roster is very full. It's hard to break in. You have to be very high quality to break into the U.S. men's national team. Mexico doesn't have that level of quality, and their development has fallen off a cliff. If you think our development is bad, Mexico's has been way, way worse in the last few years. After that golden generation passed, who's coming through? It's a big problem for Mexico. So I think this is going to continue. I think that's fine, to be honest, so long as we get the big ones. For example, Fidel Barajas is probably one of the better American prospects right now. Mexican American prospects. Do we get him? What do you think, Jack?
More towards Mexico for sure.
Yeah,
I wouldn't.
leaning towards Mexico.
Yeah, it looks like the U.S. has been in touch with him. Berhalter and apparently I think is it Mike Ivaras or the Olympic coach? I'm not sure. They're in touch, but he's definitely leaning more towards Mexico, and I believe he's provisionally cap tied. I think.
Yeah, he would have to file a one-time switch because he played for them in a youth tournament.
Yeah, he's probably one of the main ones because he's also a left-footed winger, which the only one we have is Kevin Paredes, which you never know. He could be better than Kevin Paredes. We don't know about that. It's interesting that our youth development to me is broken, and it's not good. It's really not good, and there's a lot to improve. And it's not terrible by any means. It used to be terrible. Right now, it's not terrible anymore. But it's funny to see a country like Mexico because Mexico, when you look into it, they have literally every single everything. When you look into a soccer powerhouse in the world, Mexico has it. They have a lot of people. It's a big population, which I know that's not the do all be all, but it's important. More people. They have soccer culture, legit soccer culture, passionate fans.
It's their number one sport. It's a religion over there almost.
It's not a poor country. I know some people are going to try to do that. Mexico is 100% not a poor country. They have good infrastructure, especially soccer infrastructure. They have resources with that. The league is actually extremely rich. It's a top 10 league in the world in terms of money.
Salaries, yeah.
Yeah. What else they have? They have everything. You look into it. But it's just a very mediocre team. That's the problem. Mexico should be as good historically as probably a Netherlands. Should have made some deep runs in the World Cup. Never have. Right. And what's funny about all of this is it's looking worse. You talked about this. You're bringing American players, or not American, but American developed players into their U16s. I'm going to add one more thing to strengthen your argument. They're also signing players that weren't that great in MLS last season. Brendan Vasquez struggled.
Yeah, and they paid good money for them.
Yes.
6.5 mil for Brandon Vasquez.
And Monterrey's the title contender.
Yeah.
Cade Cowell, he didn't do anything in MLS He never did anything in MLS. And Chivas just signed him. Who was the other one? Well, Zendejas is there already. But anyhow, they signed these two players that were like, I mean, I'd rather Cade Cowell and Vasquez stay in MLS than go to Liga MX. I think they make the league better than some of their players that are there. And good for them. They're probably getting paid a lot more money in Mexico, and they'll get to experience an awesome country. But these are not
also a football culture, right?
Yeah,
they will be under more pressure playing for big clubs like Chivas and Monterrey than they ever will at San Jose or Cincinnati. That's just the truth.
But why are top Mexican teams? Chivas did well last season in Liga MX, and Monterrey is a title contender. Why are these top Liga MX side signing? I'm not going to say Brendan Vasquez is a mediocre MLS player, probably a decent one, but definitely not among the best. And Cade Cowell may be promising, but hasn't done anything in MLS to warrant a move anywhere that we're talking about. So I don't know, man. There's a Mexican soccer from the league to the development. It seems to be tanking. It seems
Yeah.
to be getting progressively worse. And we've seen that with the results of the U.S. men's national team trashing them lately. It's not that we improved that much. We have improved, but I think their downfall has been sharper downwards than our improvement upwards.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And that's why when everyone says Greg beat Mexico, which is why we should worship him. I think that asterisk is very, very important. This is the worst Mexico, honestly, in my lifetime. In my lifetime. Julian Vivas says, is Paxton Aronson leaving Frankfurt? Also, I expected some youth from MLS to make the jump. So I haven't heard anything about Paxton leaving Frankfurt. Maybe they send him out on loan. I'm not sure, but I haven't heard anything about that. Yeah, we talked about the youth from MLS. It's just, honestly, they're not that good enough, and teams in Europe aren't taking a risk right now after so many disappointing performances. Also, what do you think of NFFC breach? I have no idea. What is that?
I think he's talking about how I think it was he's talking about Nottingham Forest Football Club. There, I think there was like some financial fair play regulatory breach that they just announced. Uh, I didn't look into it much, so I don't know what to say on it. What I do know is Manchester City has committed a lot of
115.
yeah, and they don't seem to ever get punished or caught. Everton lost 10 points this season.
That's
Everton.
huge, dude.
Yeah.
Honestly, if they survive, like if they don't get relegated with that, that's a huge win for Everton.
They won't because the bottom three of the Premier League this season are the weakest it's been in a long time.
Still, starting off with a 10-point minus 10 is very hard.
Yeah, but Everton will be fine. Apparently, Everton actually got caught with another violation now. I wonder if they're going to lose more points.
Well, it's so unfair. They should be doing this to Manchester City as well. Honestly, it's absurd. It's absurd that they don't. Sergio Skywalker says players like Pepe will be a big reason why Mex-Americans will choose the U.S. over Mexican national team. 2024 will be a big year for him. See, I don't know, Sergio, because the reason Pepe chose us was because Mexico wanted him for their U20s and we wanted him for our senior team. At least this is straight from Pepe's mouth. The U.S. said, come play for our senior team. Mexico said, come play for our U20s. He felt like he was above the U20s, so he chose the U.S. But right now, if there's a young Mexican-American striker, unless he's better than Balogun, Pepe, Sargent, is there really a spot for him? Probably not. We'd probably send him with our U20s. And Mexico might say, oh, come play for us. Although now they have world-class player, best striker in the history of soccer ever, Santi Jimenez, so they may not be that eager either, but we'll see what happens there. But yeah, I think it's more than just, I think Pepe chose us because he had better opportunities with us, and I think that's going to be important for our recruitment of these young Mexican-American players. But we also have to offer them a spot. Last topic of the day, is Balogun struggling in Monaco? All right, right now, he has 4 goals and 4 assists in 1,017 minutes for Monaco this season. Okay, so that's 8 goal contributions in 1,000. That's roughly about 101 goal contribution every 130 minutes. So every game and a half. By most metrics, that's still a very good season. Now, the reason we're wondering about it is because last year, okay, he had 12 goal contributions in a similar amount of minutes at the same stage. All right, so 12 versus 8 and a lot more goals. So it looked better. He was also taking penalties. Let's keep that in mind for Reyna. But I do think it's fair if you watch Balogun play at Monaco, it's fair to say from the eye test, he is struggling. Even though from production, his numbers aren't really that bad. By any metric, that's actually quite successful so far. But I think one of the reasons why he is struggling is when he was at Reims, that was a team that very much played Will Stillball, which is in transition. They loved to press, and when they would win the ball, they were very direct, and they were almost always looking for Balogun making those hard runs in behind, and he would use his pace and his 1v1 ability to get in behind and score goals for them. And he was very, very successful doing that. Monaco doesn't play that way. They're a bigger team in France. They play more in possession. They want to break you down. And so he's having to play more in possession, which is not his strength. Right?
Well,
I personally think it's good for him.
Well, I think he's having to adjust of how to play in different ways that are not in transition. He's obviously really fast, really smart in his off-the-ball movements and knows how to make the runs. He's not very clinical in front of the goal by any means, which is why he always underperforms his expected goals every
Yeah.
season. But I'm not overly concerned. I think this might be better for the U.S. men's national team because we don't really play much in transition. And if we have to play in transition, he already knows how to do it. It's forcing him to learn how to combine in tight spaces, have the proper off the ball movement when facing a low block, understand how to play in possession. He drops deep sometimes, way too much to get the ball for Monaco. Did that with the United States. Maybe it's because they're not feeding him, because sometimes it's tougher to get touches when you're playing against a low block as a center forward.
Yeah.
He'll understand that over time. But like you showed, his productivity is not bad by any means. So it's kind of impressive that we have a player, an American player, in a top 5 league with 8 goal contributions in the midseason, and people are saying that he's struggling.
Right.
Which he is, by the way. He can do better. That's the thing. That's what's impressive about it. He is struggling.
Right. So I think this is good for him in the long term, and he is 22 years old. They paid $40 million for him for the long run, okay? Even if he only gets 15 goal contributions this season, which might be a disappointment to us, certainly, I think Monaco brought him for the long term, okay? He's Wissam Ben Yedder's replacement in the long term, and I think that will be very interesting to see how he does. The $40 million is for the 5-year contract, not for – they don't need him to be 25 goal contributions in the first year, although that would be great. But he is struggling definitely visibly, but I'm not particularly worried. I do think he has the tools to be successful there long term. He's going through a bit of a slump right now. He's learning how to play in a different system that is not playing to his strength, but it will be good for the U.S. men's national team if he can learn to play this way. So, yeah. So that is it, guys. Those are some thoughts this Monday morning. I told these guys right now I'm in a play. So 2 things. I'm not going to be there for the MLS promotional tour game. I won't even call it USMNT game because I literally have a play going on at the same time. I'll do a video afterwards. I get home, I'll watch the replay, and then I'll just give my thoughts on a video. But
Don't do
TAC
that
will
to
be doing the live
yourself.
watch along.
Don't do that to yourself.
Unfortunately, I'm afraid I have to. And then also until the play is over, because Sunday afternoons, we have the play going on in Beverly Hills. So I'll do Monday morning live streams until the first week of February. Mm-hmm. Real quick. Let me see if we have anybody in the Discord chat there's nobody there. Oh, no, there's 2 people there. All right. I'll do a few calls and then I got to get going. TAC, do you need to get going? You want to stick around?
I'm going to go because usually I can't talk to them, remember, unless I'm in it too. So I'm going to go. I got to work on an episode for this week. But Pete, before I go, one quick question to you.
Yeah.
Is Christian Pulisic the greatest field player to ever play for the U.S. men's national team?
Yes.
Okay. Because the video is about that, and I agree with that. But I'm going to dive into it a bit more. All right, Pete,
I'll talk to you video. Thanks, TAC. Have a great one. All right, let's drag up this Discord here. I won't be able to do very many, guys, because I do have to get going here. But I'll try to do 3 or 4, and then this will be more regular on Monday morning. Let me just pull up the Discord. The link, by the way, I put it in the chat earlier if anybody wants to go find it. Let me go pin it, actually, so y'all can find it. It's all the way back there. Let me put it in one more time, guys. I'll put it in one more time here if I can. Nope, that's the wrong one. Let me put it one more time in the chat, and then you guys can access it. But like I said, I will only be able to do a few. Okay. Is the audio bad, Raymond? The name of the play, BMR, is The Manor. It's happening in Beverly Hills. That is the link to the Discord chat room, guys. I'll pin that on top so you guys can access it, but I probably won't be able to do very many. I'm just telling you now, but I'll start doing this again regularly Monday mornings from now on. So if we miss you this time, there will always be a next time. Let me drag in Blake. Hello, Blake.
Hey, how's it going?
Good, man. How are you?
Good. So my question is actually exactly on topic for today. I'm a Cincinnati native, love Cincinnati, great team past season, not starting out. But for players like Vasquez and Miles Robinson, What do you think their career trajectory looks like with moving to Liga MX and Miles coming to Cincinnati? I mean, there's been a lot of disagreement in the FC Cincinnati subreddit with thinking that this is career suicide, not career suicide. And I wanted to get your opinion on that because I don't really see these two players ever making a move to a big team after they made these two moves respectively.
No, I agree with you. I think both of them are at that age. Miles is 26. He's going to be 27 in March, by the way, just as the MLS season kicks off. Vasquez is 25. I know Miles only signed a 1 year with a 1 year option contract at Cincinnati, but I think this was his chance to move. I don't know how many European teams are going to take a punt on a 27-year-old or 28-year-old, actually, is what it's going to be, especially who hasn't ever really demonstrated a high level of ability. So I think you're right. I think for both Vasquez and Miles, this is not career suicide, but they've essentially, put their flagpole in MLS and Liga MX respective. And Brandon Vasquez may not even be a success in Liga MX. We'll have to wait and see how he does. If he plays anything like he did for Cincinnati last year, Monterrey, there's a lot of pressure and he needs to deliver. And it'll be interesting to see how he handles that. But I could easily see him back in MLS within a year or two as well if he doesn't figure it out in Mexico.
Yeah, I have to agree. It seems difficult. Vasquez was frustrating, to say the least, last season. And I worry for things like the World Cup with Miles Robinson, him not having that high pressure environment that a lot of the players that go to Europe report. They say their first training session is a wake up call, and you feel like you don't have a secure spot. And I just am not sure that Robinson is going to be a good look long term for our backline.
Yeah, the thing about Miles is he wasn't even really good in MLS last year. When you talk to Atlanta fans, or if you've watched it, because I watched a lot of Atlanta games to scout Caleb Wiley, Miles was not that good. I would argue he's not even a top 10 center back in MLS anymore. Right. And the fact that PSV only offered him $500,000, that kind of tells you how they value him. Like, we don't really think you're that good, but if you want to come where we don't have to pay any money for you and we can kick you a couple $100,000, it could be fun. That sort of sounds like what the deal was.
Yeah, I just don't think. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't seem like he really recovered from his injury back to 100%. And I just don't know if him making this move to Cincinnati, even though we'll love to have him here, is going to necessitate that he actually makes the World Cup squad. So I think that's going to be difficult for him.
Yeah, no, I think so too. Yeah, I guess we'll see what happens.
All right, cool. Well, thanks, Pete. Appreciate it.
No problem, Blake. All right, guys, I don't think there's anybody else here in the waiting room from what I can see. So I guess we'll just end it here, which is totally fine. And then we'll do a longer one next time because it's been an hour, or more than an hour, actually. So I do have to get going, and there's nobody in the waiting room anyway. But guys, thanks for hanging. Hope that was enjoyable. And Wednesday, I have a video dropping about a potential Olympic roster. Okay, it's a complicated thing, a video to do. Because there's a lot of different factors impacting what could be a good Olympic roster for us. So but that drops Wednesday morning. So don't forget to check that out. Thanks for hanging, guys. We'll chat more next time. Smash that like button if you haven't already. And have a great one. Jeff, there you are. Hope you all are having a very good 2024 so far. And if anybody's in LA and wants to come see a show, come see me, The Manor in Beverly Hills. All right. Talk soon, guys.